Hi everyone. So I'm going to show you that you could have solved example 1 through factoring as well, not only the quadratic formula. So sometimes you can solve in multiple ways. You can solve by factoring or the quadratic formula. Okay, and then you get to decide which technique you prefer. Now, before we get started, let's make sure my battery doesn't die. Right now it says my battery's going to die. Okay. Also, guess what? My cat is super excited to do the problem with us. So there you go. So Babette's ready, which means you guys need to be ready as well. Okay, so for example 1, you don't have to write this down because we've already done example problems on solving through factoring. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that you could also solve by factoring, and then you kind of get to decide, well, do I want to solve using the quadratic formula, or do I want to solve through factoring? Okay, so let's get started. All right, so again, since I have 3 terms and my highest term, or my highest exponent is 2, that means I have a quadratic. Isn't that right, Bobbit? My cat agrees. Okay, so that means we're going to solve by sliding and dividing. Okay, but first, let's identify the A, B, and C. So my A is going to be 1. My B is going to be, let's see here, -4. And my C is going to be 3. Now, I've already rearranged the problem. I showed you earlier how to rearrange this problem to equal 0. So I already did that for you. So we don't have to do that part again. Okay, so I set the equation equal to 0, and now we're going to solve by sliding and dividing. So I'm going to slide A to C, or multiply. So 1 times 3 is 3, and then my B is -4. Now, don't forget, at the very end, it's called slide and divide. So I slide by A, which is 1, which means I need to divide by A. Okay? So now I need to find 2 numbers that will multiply to be a +3 and add to be a -4. So don't forget, when you're multiplying 2 numbers, a positive times a positive equals a positive, and a negative times a negative also equals a positive. Which, if I want to add to be -4, that means that both of my numbers need to be a negative. So I already know that both of my numbers need to be negative, so I'm going to set that up. And the only thing that multiplies to be 3 is 3 and 1. So -3 times -1 is 3. And -3 minus 1 more is -4. Look at that. Okay, so now I'm going to bring these numbers on down into my problem. So -3 and then -1. Okay, and I'm going to simplify, and afterwards we just set each factor equal to 0, and then we're done. Isn't that right, Babette? Yep, she agrees. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so let me get this back to where it was. Okay, so let's simplify these down. So let's see here. X minus, well, 3 over 1 is 3, so this would be x minus 3. And -1 over 1 is a -1, so x minus 1. Okay, and then from here, you just set every single factor equal to 0, or you could do the shortcut where you simply just flip the signs. So I'm going to so you could say like x minus 3 equals 0 and solve for x, or you could say x minus 1 equals 0 and solve for x. Or the shortcut, if you have nothing in front of your x, then you can just flip the sign. Flip the sign. Okay, so the opposite of -3 is +3, and the opposite of -1 is +1. So x could equal 3, or x could equal 1. So if you guys see here, you can solve example 1 through the quadratic formula or through factoring. If you noticed, example 1 probably took a lot less time when we factored than when we did the quadratic formula. So that is why factoring is helpful, because you're probably like, Ms. Long, why are you teaching us how to do something in more than one way? That doesn't make sense. Why can't we always just use the quadratic formula since it works every time? Well, you can, but like I said, it is a lot faster and more efficient to solve with factoring. So that's the only downside to the quadratic formula. But there you go. You guys get to pick. You can factor this problem, or you could solve using the quadratic formula.